from the College by the Lake, Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Local, regional, national, and international guests discussing the issues and topics affecting the way you live are on Forum, the North Idaho College Public Forum, with your host and moderator, political scientist Tony Stewart.
Welcome to the fifth week in a 6-week series entitled Our Dissolving Privacy, Who's Minding Your Business? The subtopic for today is your body and the issue of privacy, and we're most pleased to welcome to our program Thomas Wright Lawford VIII. Our guest holds a BS degree in the field of communications from the University of Idaho. Our guest is a political activist, and he has served as the chairman of the University of Idaho College Republicans the years 1987 and 1988. He is also youth committeeman to the Idaho GOP Executive Committee, holding that position since 1989, and he also serves as state chairman of the Idaho Young Republicans since 1988. Our guest today is a member of the Idaho Right to Life and vice president of the Moscow, Idaho Right to Life. Mr. Lawford is also the advisor to the University of Idaho Students for Life, and our guest is a regular guest lecturer on conservative and pro-life issues at both the University of Idaho and Washington State University. Thomas Lawford is a freelance photographer, and he currently owns a portrait studio in Moscow, Idaho. Mr. Lawford, thank you for being with us today on our symposium we've been having. You've been very generous with your time, and we look forward to the interview.
Well, thank you, Tony. I'm very glad to be here with you.
And as always, I'm very pleased to have two regular panelists. To my immediate left is Janelle Burke, who is an attorney in the state of Idaho, and she also serves as law clerk to the administrative judge of the 5 northern counties of Idaho. And next to her is Steve Schink, who is the dean of college relations and development at Idaho College, and I shall ask Janelle to commence the questioning.
You've been talking with some of the students at North Idaho College as a part of the symposium series. What can you tell us was your position with regard to your body or the government intrusion into the body?
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a very interesting question. It's one that I felt very easy to answer because I looked at this one step further. And to me, the root of this question is the unborn child within the mother part of the woman's body or part of a separate, unique entity unto itself? I've taken the position that it is not a part of the woman's body, but yet has its own unique identity, i.e. its own brain waves, its own DNA structure, possibly its own gender, as well as blood type and so forth. So for me, I have been able to separate the woman's body from that of the baby, and I am personally willing to give protected status and rights to the unborn child as well as to the mother.
Let's take that a step further then and say, is that under the law then or under the Constitution? How would you then weave this into what is our legal system?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, currently under our law, clearly it is not, the child is not seen as a separate entity unto the mother. I derive this from a biological and a scientific standpoint, dealing with number of chromosomes in a cell, DNA structures, and the things I'm aforementioned, that it is not a part of the mother's body, as well of understanding that it is indeed housed in the mother's body during those first 9 months of life.
And you're saying then that life begins at what point, or the child begins at what point?
I've taken the traditionalist view that life does indeed begin at conception, and there are a few biologists who would actually dispute that. If I'm going to use the terms, when the sperm unites with the egg or the ovum, there is actually a chemical reaction where there are new chromosomes that are formed. Every human cell has within it 46 chromosomes. It's actually a pattern that's unique to only human beings. There are no other animal life nor plant life that has 46 chromosomes that make up its cell. The sperm, on the other hand, has 23 chromosomes, and likewise so does an egg. And at the moment of conception, there is a unique single-celled organism that has then 46 chromosomes with its own unique characteristics upon it. So from a biological standpoint, it is clearly a separate being than that of the mother.
And so you would give full legal protection then from the moment of conception?
Yes, I would. From my viewpoint, if it is a person and if it has life, it is worth protecting, regardless of circumstantial evidence of either how it came about or under what conditions it is currently housed in.
Steve Sheen.
Thomas, I suspect we're going to move away from the theme of this series of shows we've been involved in pretty quickly, but I'll try to stick to it for just a little while. Sure. You're familiar with Roe versus Wade,
yes,
the landmark abortion rights decision. Are you able to discuss the privacy issues involved in that case?
Yes, I am. The part of the misunderstanding of Roe versus Wade was that it did, we perceive it as something that gave us unlimited abortion rights. Actually, it was just the first case that brought up this. Actually, the case itself was not about really abortion at all. It was about the mother's right to do with her own body. I believe now that if this were to come up to the Supreme Court again, that it would be quickly removed from the privacy rights issues that came out of this penumbra from our 14th Amendment, which is the illegal search and seizure clause that is in our Constitution, which is where they derived you cannot enter into here, you cannot have government intrusion into private property. They extended that then to, a woman's body is private property, therefore we should not be able to invade or at least have government enforce what she can or cannot do within her body. So that's the basis of Roe versus Wade and how we came to abortion rights. It did not give us free will and free reign to do what we will as far as abortion rights. It was clearly dealing with privacy issues, and that's how the case was worded, and that's how it was fought, and it was won. I've talked with Sue Weddington. She was in Moscow earlier this year, and she is the lawyer who successfully defended the Roe versus Wade. And she has a viewpoint now, very interestingly enough, that thinks that if they were to take the same case again to the Supreme Court, she would totally have to change her arguments. And a lot of that, she still thinks she could win, but most of it has come from the advent of new technology, the ultrasound, and different technologies that we can discern more what's going on in the woman's body. We didn't have that technology in '73 when that case came down. So she feels it still could be won, but it would take a total different avenue to approach the winning of Roe versus Wade.
What circumstances would have to exist to bring a similar case back to the Supreme Court for trial?
It's going to take it's going to have to come through a state Supreme Court. Somewhere, some legislature is going to have to say, this is it. And we saw a very similar case late last year in Pennsylvania, where they had a parental notice and a 24-hour waiting period that went through. And I think that even here in Idaho, we had a couple years ago House Bill 625 that I worked very hard with, and it I felt was designed specifically to go right at the heart of Sandra Day O'Connor, who I thought was the sway vote on that 9-member jury. It will take some states saying that we are going to place a limit on what a woman can do with her own body, specifically relating to the act of abortion. And when that happens, it will immediately, I guarantee it'll be immediately challenged and taken up to a federal court and eventually reach the Supreme Court. I don't see that happening in this year at all. I don't know of any states that are actively pursuing that type of thing. And it's mainly on the politicians' part. It's an item of image. It's something that there's too much you have to explain in order to justify one way or the other. And you're going to offend people either way. And politicians just don't want to deal with it.
And if privacy won't be the hinge point for the next Roe v. Wade decision, what will be in your mind?
I tell you exactly what it will be. It will be, is the human fetus a human being or not? And I think the scientific and the biological evidence clearly backs that up, the evidence, if the case is approached from that standpoint, is that it will be overturned.
Thomas, if I may call you by your first name.
Yes.
This morning in your presentation that you gave to the symposium, I think you really were accurate to say that this is one of the most difficult issues of our time as far as a resolution of that question.
Yes.
And you really underscored that. Would you like to elaborate upon the fact that, as one perceives that from your perspective, there is a human life involved, and from the perspective of those people that are supporting the pro-choice movement, it is a fundamental privacy constitutional question and right to a woman to determine her own reproductive processes. With those two fundamental points in mind, do you see any chance of resolution of the question that often happens in other political questions over a period of time, or will this go on as a debate for generations?
Excellent question. I think the problem that we're dealing with here is a matter of perception of the real issue. And if the real issue is, do we have a right to privacy? I view that as a smokescreen. I don't think that's the real issue. If I were an activist for the pro-choice crowd, that would be a technique that I would use. Don't deal with is it a human being or not. I don't think you can win on that because the evidence is too stacked against you. I think the best technique is to take it one step further and deal with it in a privacy issue or a woman's rights issue. I think that's smart on their behalf. I think now that the pro-life movement, especially in this state, is wisening to the fact that there is technique and strategy, and as I mentioned this morning, marketing that needs to go into this cause. Is it worth fighting for this? Can you have an abortion? Can you not have an abortion? If it is, let's just not quibble about technique to win the battle. Let's win the battle. If it's not that important, well, then everyone can claim their moral high ground by this is the technique that we are going to use to fight this battle.
Would you agree that there is great intensity in belief on both sides of the issue, though? That
only
makes
a fool would say there isn't. Clearly, yes, it's a very emotional issue. Nobody disputes that, and there are extreme approaches to resolution of this issue from both sides. And when the middle ground is reached and people come together and reason and discuss the ideas openly, with open ears, not just speaking to an audience to convince someone who isn't hardcore on either end of the spectrum of this issue, then we can get some resolution about it.
Janelle Burke.
With regard to the privacy issue, suppose that a husband and a wife determine that they wish to have an abortion, that a child that is expected during the first trimester. We're really talking about the first trimester under Roe versus Wade for the most part.
Under Roe versus Wade, yes, it was dealing with first trimester.
And so basically during that first trimester they determine as a family matter that they wish to have an abortion. Would you say then that government is entitled to come into the family decision and determine that they're not entitled to do that?
Well, there's a couple assumptions in your question let me address. First, I don't want to let it go unsaid that we are no longer in the United States dealing with just first trimester abortions. Abortions are legal through all three trimesters, right up until the point of birth. And there's no punishment for mother or doctor for following through with an abortion.
So you're saying that they're legal through that period of time?
Oh yes, in every state. There is no punishment that is awarded or assigned to any individual for performing one of these. So to say it's illegal, any act that's illegal, there is some consequence or punitive charge, if it may be punitive, that's assigned with it, but there's not in the case of abortion. So I just don't want to let that assumption go through. The second is that we're dealing with the result of an action. In the case of a pregnancy, we're dealing with two obviously mature adults. They are married. They have done an action that has resulted in a pregnancy. And I don't think that the time to start dealing with the consequences of our action is after the fact. There are preventive measures, and it's almost undertoned in that is the idea of, well, it's an unwanted pregnancy or an unplanned or untimed pregnancy. And most pregnancies are, statistically shown even by Gallup, unplanned. And a survey I quoted this morning was dealing with parents that have 2 or more children. When they were asked, were your children planned and was that the proper time, they said no.
But suppose that it's not for planning purposes at all. Suppose that they have decided this for medical purposes for one reason or another. Are you still saying that the government has a right to come into that family's determination and decide that they should not?
Legally under the law, we do not now. I would like to see a time when that's not one of the considerations.
So you believe that they would have a right then to go into the family's decision?
I would put it on the other foot and say an individual does not have the right to kill another human being. And when put in that light, it's fairly clear. It's not a matter of government intruding, although I certainly believe that's one of the jobs of our government. Laws are to regulate behavior. They're to put limits on our behavior, whether it be speeding, whether it be drug abuse or prostitution, which is a very, it's almost wrong to link these two, but for purpose of discussion only, we have laws that say a woman cannot do with her own body, i.e. prostitution, because we as a society have decided this is morally wrong. Therefore, we're going to limit what you can do with your own body. And for an organization to say, well, we have a right to do with our own body what we want to do, well, there's no precedence for that. That's government's job to limit and regulate people's behavior. That's how we function as an orderly society.
Now, I simply can't let it go by, but I want to know what kinds of penalties would you suggest for an abortion then under those circumstances? What kind of penalties do you think would you propose?
Let me first say that I do not view the woman as the one who should be punished. I see her as a second victim in an abortion. I'm sympathetic with the woman.
But she's the one who made the decision.
Yes, but she's not the one who performed the operation. I would rather hold the doctors liable and most women, I don't even know most, many women who proceed to have an abortion are not doing so with full understanding of the operation that's going, what stage of development their child is in within their womb, and those are the type of things that I'm concerned about. Informed consent, and where we have every other major operation where someone is put under gas or whatever, knocked out, and they go under the knife, there's a lot of information that needs to go forth. There is a lot of understanding that needs to take place before the operation, and we're not seeing that in the abortion industry, and I want to know why. I think they have a responsibility.
So you wouldn't hold her then criminally responsible?
Certainly
or
not.
her husband?
No.
And
I would like to see a place where men can have a say in this. Right now they do not. A man has no right whatsoever to have a say whether his wife or even an acquaintance that is impregnated by him, whether they can or cannot have an abortion arranged term.
Steve Sheen. Thomas, earlier you said the decision on the part of pro-choice people to link their position with women's rights is a strategy move.
Oh, yeah.
The last position you just described, not holding either the father or the mother responsible, but only the doctor, is that a strategy move? Are you trying to isolate a very small group of people and make them liable as opposed to spreading the consequences of abortion across the entire society?
In effect, it is. I'm not uncomfortable with that label at all. What I'm interested in doing is somebody has to be held accountable for the consequences of this. We're losing about 1.5 million babies in America every year, and it seems to be holding at about that number. The blame has to go somewhere, and I see people are motivated to do abortions for one of two reasons. Either it comes from their worldview, i.e. we have a system, a nature, if you will, that is all nice and dandy in itself. Somehow man was injected into this system, and he's the crux of the problem. So we can remove man out, everything will be wonderful. And to stretch, I mean, that's where our overpopulation thinking comes from. It's where I think some of the people involved, this is by no means a superlative, that are involved with the abortion issue are interested in seeing the population held down. The other motivating factor would, of course, be money. And if you are getting anywhere between $200 and $1,500 per operation, there is a monetary motivation to see this industry continue on the way it is.
Do you see the question of abortion primarily as a legal issue or as a moral issue?
I think it's clearly both. Because, as I said earlier, all laws are legislated morality. You know, somewhere along the line, somebody decides it's morally wrong to murder, therefore let's make a law against it. It's, you know, just like we have helmet laws for children. It's morally wrong to have a child riding a motorcycle behind an adult without a helmet. Let's make a law. We're putting restrictions on their behavior. And I think we're dealing with the exact same thing in this issue. We need to use our laws to legislate morality. And that's hard because we've heard so many times over and over, well, you can't legislate morality. Well, that's just wrong. All laws are legislated morality. And the other thing is they don't want to see us legislate into the bedroom. We're not talking about a bedroom police going in here. We're not after that at all.
I'm not as well informed on the abortion issue as I probably should be, given its importance. But it seems to me that I have read that something like 60 to 65% of the American people are in favor of legalized abortion. But let's say that it's 50-50. Let's say that it's 50% favored and 50% are opposed. How troubled are you, and I know you can pose this question either way, whichever way you sit on the position, but how troubled are you about how divisive this is, and how, regardless of the decision, huge numbers, millions of people in this country are going to be very, very unhappy?
Let me address your statistics first. As in all statistics, and I've taken my statistics class, it just depends on who asks the question and how. If it is, do you believe that a woman or a doctor has a right to murder an unborn fetus? Boy, everyone backs off that, well, no. If it is, do you believe that government has the right to intrude into private decisions of a woman? Well, no. So it depends on which aspect you're approaching the issue from. Many of the polls say that everybody thinks that there should be some type of restrictions on abortion. That's particularly where this would come in is in sex selection abortions, which are becoming more and more prevalent. That's appalling to me. And the other, interesting to note, that most of the abortions for sex selection are females that are aborted, which if I was a feminist, which I'm obviously not, that would alarm me. To think that, well, why? And in some of the cultures within the United States, it is a status to have a son as your firstborn and not a woman. I think that's tragic, and I think there's some people that need to rise up in arms and defeat that. Also, clearly, in every state, and this is under the guise of self-defense, if the mother's life, which is actually very rare anymore because of our medical technology, an abortion should be allowed. That would be what used to be common for threatening the mother's life was that of a breached baby, where the baby was just not going to come through the canal. Now we have the cesarean operation where we can open up the abdomen in the womb and bring the child out that way. And many women who have even started into labor in the hospital, clearly it wasn't going to be a natural birth. And I don't have a problem with cesarean at all. The object of pregnancy and birth to me is to have a healthy, happy baby. So.
Thomas, we want to move in another area, and that has to do with something you said against symposium, and you referred to it here today too, and that has to do with, even though obviously you have the credentials, obviously for the pro-life movement and position, you worked very hard at it, but I was intrigued by the fact that you also was giving advice to the pro-life movement, and you felt there had been some mistakes. Would you like to share some of your recommendations with the pro-life organization?
Yeah, and I just barely touched to it. One of the things here is it's a marketing issue. I think for too long the three main groups in America on this issue are the 8 to 12% of the people that are pro-life, 8 to 12% of the people that are pro-choice, and the vast majority of the American populace, what I call the mom and pops of this world, they're not really, they just make it go away. I don't care. Whatever's easiest. And at this point, it's easiest to say, let the woman do what she wants to do, let the doctors do whatever procedure they want. I don't care. I think because the pro-choice crowd has focused their energies in appealing to the mass populace of the country and saying, look, this is a women's rights issue. We've got radical people that just want to take over the country on this other end. We need to protect our rights. Very effective message. The pro-life crowd has focused their energies on converting the 8 to 12% of the pro-choice people. I think that's bad strategy. When I look at that demographic group, I see the bulk of America as customers and the pro-choice people as the competition. I don't try to sell my product to the competition. I try to sell my product to the customer. And I would approach that and advise us, say, look, go after the heartstrings of the fathers in this country who have adolescent girls. Say, look, this is a great thing if you're a horny, uncontrolled teenage male, and you better protect your daughter because now this guy, this young teenager, has a new tool that he can use against your daughter. That is, well, if anything does happen, there's always a fail-safe. There's always abortion. And if I was a father of a teenage adolescent girl, I'd be a little concerned because that's not the approach that people are using now on this issue. They're not seeing it from it's a license for illicit sex. I mean, that's the bottom line. in many areas, and it's again maybe goes back to the money issue. So if the pro-life crowd will address the customers and say, look, there is post-abortion syndrome that even Planned Parenthood admits now finally is happening. There's traumas, especially related to the girl during the anniversary of her abortion, if she's had one. Those type of things really concern me. The depression cycles don't end when you, abortion is supposed to be a panacea for the problem. And I see it, hey, it just begins. So in answer to your question, there's much that the pro-life movement can do.
Janelle Berg.
Well, it's difficult with so little time left. We're not going to have very much time, but I want to get into some of the other privacy issues that are family life oriented as well. The matter of contraception, do you see this as a family privacy matter?
Absolutely. There's the pro-life movement is basically centered on three issues. Abortion right now is at the forefront of it, but there's also euthanasia and infanticide. Euthanasia, pulling the plugs, as has been colloquialized in our media, of old people, elderly people, terminal patients, and I think that, as I mentioned earlier, that abortion is both a symptom and a cause. It is a cause in the sense that it breaks down people's value of human life. They don't seem to hold it as dear. If you can, to me, well, you're better off being an eagle in a nest than a baby in a womb. It's much safer because you're protected if you're an eagle egg with a $10,000 fine for violating that egg in its nest. But yet we financially reward our doctors who take the baby out of a womb. The other issue that I see here is, as far as it being a symptom, you can't just deal with it point blank. It's just a symptom of a breakdown in morality in our country. If we have 1.5 million abortions every year, well, why are all these people getting pregnant? Most of them out of wedlock, and it seems to me that we've lost some of our traditional family values that would say, no, there's a place for pregnancy and there's a place for children, and this is, in our society, the normal flow of how things should go, and we seem to have lost that.
Steve Shink, we have about a minute.
Real quick question, are there, and this is maybe not privacy related, but are there tactics that you would oppose as ardently as you believe in pro-life? Are there tactics that pro-life people use that you think are wrong?
Well, absolutely. We just saw a classic case in Florida.
The death, of course, everybody
tragic.
abhors that, but short of that, harassment of doctors, for instance.
Yeah, see, I am not convinced that we need to turn to civil disobedience yet. I think there are many legal means in which we can resolve this issue, and I would like to see us utilize those methods before we resort to anything such as civil disobedience.
On that note, I have to bring the program to conclusion. Thomas Ratloffer, thank you so much for being with us. We've enjoyed having you on our program and the panel for their fine questions. Ladies and gentlemen, I would invite you to be with us again next week at the same time when we will do the 6th and final week of this series entitled Our Dissolving Privacy. Until then, please have a good week. I am Tony Stewart.
The North Idaho College Public Forum was videotaped live from the studios of Telemedia Services on the campus of North Idaho College for viewing at this more appropriate time. We invite you to join us again next week for another all-new edition of the North Idaho College Public Forum on this public television station.